Well, we head back to the heady island of Ireland once again for episode number 31, as Lawrence de Souza was the man that brought us to episode number 30, but I've got another man from the locality of Cork. Kevin Galvin joins me, who we finally met in person at the SimRacing Expo in Dortmund. Kevin, how you going?
Very good, Alex. It was really nice to meet you finally in Dortmund, and I feel a little bit what would I say, cheated that Lawrence was on before me, but only for the fact that, I know people say Ireland is a small country, and we're always trying to say, no, like it's a big, not everybody knows each other, but Lawrence literally lives about 10 minutes away from me. So it is very much buying into the cliche of Ireland being a tiny place. But I promise you, there are other places in Ireland where people sim race, not just in Cork.
Yeah, considering Jack was the second ever interviewee on Commentator's Corner anyway, someone that you know
That's
well,
right.
having worked with before. But Kevin, one of the things I like all my guests to do is to introduce themselves to the audience, whether they're watching or listening. So take it away. The floor is yours.
Yeah, and I feel I need more introductions than most because I'm not as into the whole. I haven't been traditionally into sim racing as long as some of you guys have, and people mightn't be as familiar with me. So, yeah, I suppose originally big soccer head, come from a big soccer family, three generations fans. Always dabbled in soccer commentaries and podcasts and things, and then my local team, Cork City, who I would go to all their games home and away. There's very little coverage of the league in Ireland, a lot more now, but at the time there wasn't. So I said, right, I'm going to do commentaries of all the games because I'm going to them anyway, so I might as well provide them for people. So myself and a microphone and a laptop, and 8 years later, we had done what we called Rebel Radio because we're known as the Rebel Army, with Cork being the rebel county. So we 8 years later we did that, and then I suppose I kind of kept writing in football. Um, was writing for ages, decided nuts to that, went off and did Asia for 9 months, dropped everything, came back, got a job in radio, and then the pandemic happened. So when the pandemic happened, the first thing I did was buy a G29. Originally for truck sim, I won't lie, and I'd always kind of like we're family of PS1 family, so it was like Toka touring cars, V Rally, the original Formula One. So we were always big into kind of motorsport, but from afar, like we could never afford it. I don't come from a motorsport background. None of the family are really into cars that much, apart from my brother. So yeah, I suppose motorsport for me was kind of a relatively new thing. So I did a bit of racing, and then got into iRacing, did the team stuff, and then actually what kind of first happened was I saw Race Spots coverage of that year's Nuremberg 24th, and I remember looking at it and going like, "This is unbelievable! Like the level of this coverage is." And I hate saying is like real world because that's just a phrase that I think should be banned from sim racing terminology. But we might talk about that later. But like it did really it did, the production values on it were so high. So I suppose I was working as a professional sports broadcaster and I thought to myself, right, well, maybe I can add something here. Like maybe this is actually really high standard. Got involved with Apex Racing TV. They put me on to the Digital Motorsports Championship, and then I suppose through the very hard work of Niall Maher, the Digital Motorsports World Cup happened. And obviously other people in digital motorsports, but really I think Niall was kind of the lightning paper for it. Unbelievable, like 2 or 3 days of madness. And really, what I felt was a really successful event. And then unfortunately, there was whole plans for things to happen and it never quite happened. So I'm still doing bits and bobs for RCI on ACC, and we worked a bit on VEM. That's the ACC thing with LFM. But very much changed jobs in the meantime, ended up working in a current affairs show. So having gone like fully sport to fully current affairs, and now kind of hankering for more sports. So I'm kind of itching to get back into the sports side of it. So that's a very brief resume kind of where I've been, but I've really, really enjoyed it. Really enjoyed it. And it was great to go to Sim Expo and actually meet the people that you hear about and you see online. It's great to actually put faces to names. So yeah, it was kind of my first time ever actually being amongst it. So that was great.
Yeah, of course, we have to give a shout out to Jack Canaan and Bryn Lucas, who were part of the
Yeah.
team. You and Jack commentating on all the racing action. Bryn, I've known for quite a few years, a very accomplished commentator, host, presenter in his own right. So please excuse the noise in the background. Little Pooch is probably having a little bit of a whine because he's waiting for Mummy to come back, and he's just jumped into his bed here in the office. Get down. So this happens all the time. Get in your
Yeah,
bed. Go on.
yeah.
Get in your bed. Go on.
We have our own. I have the doors blocked. Our own little mutt running around the place, which is quite enough. Yeah, no. Jack and I were paired together with the Digital Motorsports with Apex Racing, and I really, once I kind of found that league, I wasn't really that interested in doing a huge amount of other stuff in the week. I had quite a lot with the broadcasting, obviously, and we were going to matches and doing huge events, so it was brilliant. And the thing about Jack is, like, you can commentate with people, and different people get on with different people. But, like, when you meet somebody and there's that kind of instant connection, like you're just on the same vibe or on the same page. And that was really me and Jack. Like, we like, I stayed over at Jack's just before we went to the Sim Racing Expo, and we were just like 3 or 4 hours over a cup of tea, just catching up. And it's like falling back into an old, it's like, those people that you don't see for months on end, and then you meet them and it's like nothing, no time has passed at all. That's kind of the way myself and Jack have been. So really, it's one of the best things I've actually gotten out of sim racing. With, I suppose, between that and my own team, Wildfire Racing, the endurance team that I race for, it's just the people that you meet, but myself and Jack are just like, I've just never met somebody in the online world, if you want to put it that way, that I've actually met in real life and gone on with as well as Jack. We just get on like a house on fire. So hopefully we'll have more projects in the future. Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, coming over to the Sim Racing Expo, like meeting everyone that had travelled over. Of course, Lawrence, is a well-known content creator in sim racing. But then, of course, the people that make up the Potato Nation community, which is absolutely brilliant, having sponsored 6 race cars, including a very good friend, Chaos Cole, who is a good friend of mine through Sarah Moore, who's just become the first ever female winner of a race of the Indian Racing League in Chennai not too long ago.
Yeah.
But it was really, really good to see that mix of different product producers, such as, of course, some of the big hitters. I mean, Fanatec. I mean, no one could actually just walk past that Aston Martin Valkyrie that they had on their stand and stop drooling. You couldn't stop drooling if you looked at a £3 million car that has about 1,200 horsepower and is one of a rare breed around the world. But the meeting everybody, and when you, myself, and Jack, like, we were just having a chat. I think it was by the that wonderful BMW E30 M3 that had that very, very weathered Warsteiner wrap on
Yeah.
it. It was really good to actually meet people in person. And okay, for people wondering how I'm actually recording this, it's over Discord via OBS. But meeting people in person is a very, very different kettle of fish, because you're able to actually talk to people rather than being on push to talk or having to worry about shutting doors or whatever. You're like,
Yeah.
you're in the space, and it was quite a visceral feeling, wasn't it, meeting up in person?
Yeah, there's just like, I mean, people say it all the time, but it's true. There's nothing like actually meeting people, and I think that was one of the things that when we commentated on the Digital Motorsports Championship, because a lot of the lads were Irish, they would have been involved in Mondello Park up in Kildare, and Jack would have known them, and obviously I got to know them very well. And I think one of the things that we miss a little bit from commentary when it comes to sim racing is that kind of personal touch. Like, you hear commentators and it's kind of like, okay, well, Wednesday I'm doing this race and Thursday I'm doing this race, and obviously commentators are doing the best they can. They're trying to take in as many gigs, but it means that they don't have the time to engage with, I suppose, the drivers as much. So there can be a kind of a, I suppose, like, driver A is doing this, and now driver B is doing this, and like, here is this person whose name I can't pronounce from this country, who I've never been to. And I suppose for us, the great thing about the Digital Motorsport series was that we knew the lads really well. We knew them as personalities, and we kind of knew the the kind of, I suppose, the rivalries. We knew kind of what made them tick. We knew all the in jokes, so we were able to kind of add context to what was happening in the racing. So, very famously, I suppose, famously. It is in famously within the Digital Motorsports group. Keith Dempsey, who was a former FIA Motorsport Games competitor for Ireland and a guy I have a massive amount of respect for, got involved in a couple of incidents in one of our leagues, and I was very, very critical of him. Like on commentary, I was saying like this guy is full of talent, but he keeps crashing into people. So like, how does he expect to win championships if you can't keep your car clean? And there was a whole weak drama over it, about all these comments that were taking place in the way that things go. But actually, what it did was it really added spice to the championship as well, because there was a sense that the commentators were passionate about it, that they actually cared about what was going on, as opposed to just being like, here is commentary by the numbers for this race that I'm, that I kind of have to do, or that I'm doing every week. And this is, by the way, isn't the criticism of the way it is, because that's the way it is. But I think we miss a paddock. That kind of way you always hear about, like, word around the paddock, or you talk to drivers around the paddock. And I think if there's one thing I'd love to see in sim racing commentary, is to see, first of all, more commentators employed, and more commentators given the opportunity to have the time to invest in the series that they're racing in, so that they can kind of get to know the drivers and then deliver what that, like, yourself from the real world stuff, that there is that kind of connection with the drivers, and so you understand the context of everything that's going on at the track.
Yeah, I completely agree. The thing is, from my karting travels, having been the voice of European road tax for the last 6 years, that having that insight where you're able to go and talk to the driver and say, "What happened last time out? Because you had a bit of a mare, didn't you, in the final?"
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that I personally, and I completely agree with you, Kevin, that we need these little bits of stories, these little sort of like trinkets of information that you can add. And I always think that by being a commentator, you should have your personal way of starting a race.
Mm.
Like, it's taken me, I mean, I've been in commentary now for 7 years, sim racing within the last 3.5. And it's now where I've finally found my catchphrase for starting races, like with Murray Walker, or like, say, George Morgan, for instance, who says go 5 times when the lights go out. And that's more
Yeah.
times than Murray ever did in his commentary career, God rest his soul. David Croft, it's lights out and away we go.
Mm.
Everyone has an identifiable race start. And yeah, it can take time to get to that point. But I think, yeah, it's that having that paddock like atmosphere in a Discord server whereby the commentators will look at. And I use this as a reference point now in sim racing, where I see a Discord. If I see a general chat, I've clicked on that and I'm waiting to see what skirmishes are happening, or whether someone's apologised to somebody for taking them out in a
Yeah.
race. I mean, we had a perfect example quite recently on AMX Global, and it was the Zero League, where it was zero entry, and you get dollars for if you finish in the top 15, and if you get fastest lap or whatever.
Mm.
And we had it was Hockenheimring GT4. We just had Heat 1, so top 15 get reversed for Heat 2. And then on the start, an Aston has taken out a Lamborghini, or a McLaren, going into the last double right at Sudkurva. And so everyone else that has passed to miss it has got a black flag.
Yeah.
And I was just like thinking, so we were having a discussion after the broadcast, and I said, "What do you think should happen?" I said, "That guy that caused that issue for other drivers. First of all, you can't change the results, but the driver who's caused that needs to have some sort of penalty thrown their way, whether it be
Yeah.
a quali ban, or whether it be can't participate in the next the next sort of 3 races, or 3 events." And if they go, "Well, can't you change the results?" Well, no, you can't override a black flag for what's just occurred,
Yeah.
because if the results are changed in a real life race, let's say GT4 European Series as a comparison, okay, the person who's caused that problem is going to get that slam dunk penalty. But you can't do everything else for the results, because it's not going to be right. But even
Oh
though
yeah.
even though
And,
the fact is, on a rolling start in an IRL race, you won't have a black flag like you will have in iRacing.
No, but I think I mean, that's sport generally, and that's one of the reasons why we love it. I mean, the unpredictability of it, and not necessarily always the best. Well, unless you're watching Formula One this year, but not necessarily
Oh,
always the best car and best driver
mhm.
wins the race. And that's one of the things that I suppose keeps people interested. And I love those reverse grids for that very reason. That's the format that we had in digital motorsports, and I was so keen on it because I think to be a great driver is more than hot lapping. And a lot of the races you see, it's like they start in first to get a good start, and then they're just hot lapping basically for the rest of the race. And obviously, there's a huge amount of talent in that. But what I love is seeing the guys, and it was inevitably the guys who were the quickest would always end up rising to the top. So they would start in 15th and they would pick their way through the field and they would avoid the carnage and they would not get in trouble and they would make their way to the front. And like, there's a huge amount of skill in avoiding trouble. And I think people, especially when you watch some of the races, you can see that you're kind of watching first place and you're seeing him doing his thing, but it's kind of watching how people like what I love is seeing a first or second place spin out in the first couple of laps and then tracking them as they work their way back through the field. I find those, especially in the endurance racing, because there's so long to go. I love seeing how teams change their strategy and like that's kind of I find that more interesting than watching a P1 or whatever, Q3 of qualifying, because essentially qualifying is just hot lapping anyway. So I'd much rather see a guy go from back to front and show us his actual racemanship as opposed to just, okay, here's your P1, off you go into the sunset. And, now you've 30 laps to just not crash and you'll be fine, you know.
Well, one of the things that I like to do here on Commentator's Corner is talk about funny moments on social media. So we have had a discussion about this beforehand because I wanted to keep Kevin prepared for this one, unlike everyone else who I've just literally thrown under the bus. But it was at the Sim Racing Expo, October the 14th on Twitter. It's not being called X on this show. I don't care, Elon Musk.
Yeah,
You can bang me to rights about that. I don't care.
agreed.
And it just so happened to involve our previous guest, and your words were Santa's here, and Lawrence gets a tag, and he's got a big bag in his hand. And this was at Strebels when we were there for the party, where all of you lot were watching the rugby between Ireland and New Zealand. And I know that
Yeah.
Jack didn't look too great the following morning, probably having had quite a few beers. I'm not going to talk about that, but what actually was in the bag?
Oh God. There's an NSFW answer to that. No, there isn't. It was all very clean. That was a great night because we had kind of gotten onto Sim Racing Expo and we were like I know it's a German pub, but like can we get the match on? It is kind of one of the biggest games in Irish sporting history because we're usually rubbish at sports. So we have our own sports that we're really good at and then we're rubbish at all the rest of them. So to have a rugby team who's actually could have gotten to a World Cup final was something for us. But so we kind of managed to get them to do that. And there was, everyone was like, yes, okay, great. And then all of a sudden, Lawrence arrived with a sack of stuff. And I had no idea that this was happening, by the way, because I'm not really a potato nationer. Like I get on really well with Lawrence and very fondly with him, but we do our own thing, myself and Jack, and mostly. But so I was kind of like, what's the story here? So Lawrence turned up with this, like, it was literally like a sack of toys for all of his followers. So it had like a wheel rim, it had button boxes, gloves, shoes. So Lawrence had it set up that either um, Lawrence would pay for the tickets for the guys to go to Sim Expo, or they would pay for their own tickets and he would buy a bag of goodies and raffle it out. So that's what he ended up doing. They paid for their own tickets, they came over with him, and then he, as a way of saying thanks for coming over, had this big bag of goodies. I mean, LD is like the king of self promotion, right? And we take the mick out of him all the time for it. But like, I don't know who else would go to an event with a pic with a jersey with their own face on the front of it. But like whatever way LD's personality is, it just works. Like he's just such a kind of an extroverted guy that you can kind of understand it. And he's that whole Potato Nation thing is just like that was the first time I'd really spent that much time with them, and they're so nice. They're really, really kind of very normal, nice guys. And actually, I ran into one of them, Gavin Taylor, who I give a shout out to, in a pub in Kilkenny, months afterwards, and actually only very recently. And the pub was packed, and there was no seats to be had. And Gavin came up to me and said, "Look." sit yourself in there. You could sit yourself in my seat there now until you get sorted out for a table. So it's just goes to show you that, it can pay off down the line. So, but Lawrence is, what Lawrence does is, it's really funny because he just lives in this kind of housing estate in Ballincollig, which is kind of on the suburbs. It's very just normal kind of tech guy, and then all of a sudden he has this huge following that watches his streams and everything. It's and in Ireland, I suppose, I suppose it more. I think more in England you can kind of get away with it. There's that sense of, because it's such a bit, it's more of a bigger place. So you kind of do your own thing. But in Ireland, it's very much like, don't be getting notions now. Don't you be thinking now you're Mr. Celebrity. So for him to do that, like, we take the piss out of him mercilessly, but it's all in good jest. He takes it well, in fairness to him.
Yeah,
So yeah.
I can't even remember the first time I actually met Lawrence, which was funnily enough in Nuremberg. I door stopped him whilst he was probably finishing off a live stream that he normally likes to do whenever he goes to an event. And then he got me back and then papped me whilst I was on the stage in the commentary on the commentary booth, which was, it was very, very different. For those wondering about how big the stage was in Nuremberg, it was massive, absolutely massive. We had main sort of like main stage bit, and then we had a seating area on one side, seating area on the other side for the respective panels. And then the commentator position for me and for Corby, who was doing it, and also Paul Glover from SimRacing GP, it was 15 to 20 feet in front of the main stage. And also on day one, I remember Luke and Matza going like, "Hello, we're still here," like when they'd actually pan to us on the camera. And then I remember there were no screens, so there's no feed being pumped to us apart from the big screen that we could see in front of us with a big like proper industrial strength TV camera from what looked like the early 2010s, that looked rather expensive with a big huge halo light in front of it. And so had to ask for screens, had to ask for power sockets as well, so an extension cable. And then very, very different this year in Dortmund. I have to say that the stage and the commentary position was a lot better because we were actually able to use the Trinitron screen as the output for what myself and Nico were seeing. And it was also a great place for Luke and Matsu to sort of like have a seat of their own. And it was very, very cozy in comparison. And we had a packed house for, I think it was the first race of the professional trophy on the Saturday, and I managed to get a round of applause from everybody in the stage, which was actually quite a nice feeling. And Matsu had done the thing of speaking in English, and then for those that didn't understand, speak in German, and get a lot of people to come over to the stage, which was pretty good. But what were your impressions of the Sim Racing Expo from your aspect, Kevin?
Yeah, it's a funny one. I think, I suppose the reason we went over there, the funny thing was we originally went over there because we had this podcast called The Final Stint, which was all kind of endurance racing. It was supposed to be about endurance racing, real and virtual. And it kind of was an idea of a teammate of mine in Wildfire. And we decided, I kind of said to him, look, like, I'm working full time. I've done an awful lot of podcasts. Like, everybody thinks it's great to do a podcast until you actually realize the amount of work that goes into doing a podcast. So, like, unless you're kind of willing to like do the work, do the extra work, then there's no point. So we kind of carried it on. We got some good guests, in fairness. But anyway, I digress. So that kind of fell through because I was doing all the work on it essentially without being too fine of a detail on it. And I was also working in a job that, like, the job I have at the moment is very high stress and kind of constantly around the clock. So I was just like, look, lads, I don't have time for it. I'm going to pack it in. So we packed it in. But we had Danny from the company who run Sim Racing Expo, Danny Juza. And he was a great guest and we got on really well. And we kind of made a decision on the spot. We were like, look, let's go. Like, what have we got to lose? So we decided we were going to go. And then we, about a week before the event, we saw a poster of a meet and greet and we were on it. We were like, we haven't had a podcast for the last like 8 months. So I don't think anybody really wants to meet and greet us. I think nobody even remembers it kind of existed in the first place. So we went over there. So I suppose when I went over there, it was kind of a chance to meet people. It was a bit of networking, which I hate doing, by the way. Networking is like, I hate networking. It's one of the things I hate the most. Or like, not networking, but that kind of disingenuous networking where it's like, oh, it's great to know you. Can I have a job? You know what I mean? It's like that kind of like I'd much rather meet people and have a bit of fun with them and then naturally, but I find these things. So we were doing a lot of kind of walking around in circles and it was so packed on the Saturday that we didn't really get to sample that much. So in a way I thought it was like I think one of the things I took away from it was I think I suppose I'll preface this by saying the most interesting thing I thought there was the coffee racer stand. That for me was the best thing there. It wasn't the most high tech, most certainly wasn't the most flash thing there. Well, that and the E30, the M3 E30, which I was massively big fan of. But you can take your Valkyrie. I don't care. I'd take a BMW E30 over a Valkyrie any day. But that's just me.
I completely agree on
Um,
that one.
yeah,
I completely
it's
agree.
just classics. But and I just find I found there was a lot of kit there for a lot of people who really probably couldn't afford it. So I thought the racing stuff was great. We were talking about it ourselves about how we really said like more LAN events need to happen. There needs to be more, and for the very reason that we were talking about earlier, actually being able to speak to people and meet people, and for the drivers to interact with each other. And I'd much rather a guy take out another guy and for them to be in the same room and have to talk to each other in person after about it, as opposed to just being like, sorry on Discord. Like I feel like there's that little bit more respect when you're actually sitting in a room with somebody as opposed to just racing with them online. And also, you can do all the side stuff from our point of view. It's great because we can nip off and grab somebody for an interview here or grab a chat there and use that kind of in our own commentaries, which I think enhances the whole experience for everyone watching. But I thought it was like I suppose I don't really have anything to compare it with. I wouldn't be like I suppose I thought it's there's huge potential there if we could get more stands. And I know Moza were kind of last minute pulled out, and there was a few other bits, but um, I just felt like a lot of it was a lot of really on it. Look, it's an expo, so it's an opportunity for them to show off their highest tech. But a lot of the stuff there, I kind of felt like, will you actually really use that, or is it just a kind of a gimmick for people to kind of So from that perspective, a lot of the stands weren't of massive interest to somebody who doesn't you know like obviously I'm working a full-time job, but I'm not I don't own my own company or anything like that. I don't have the money to splash, so a lot of it wasn't hugely relevant to me, but it was just great to meet people, like meet yourself, meet Luke Crane, obviously meet Yaroslav Honzik, who obviously I commentate on and watched quite a lot of his content. Went over to the Williams stand, we're chatting to those guys for a bit, and I suppose next time now we commentate on those guys. First of all, we know what they were like, and second of all, we can say, "Well, I chatted to him a few months ago," and I think it's just the more personal you can keep it, and the more you know people, the better experience you can have for the viewers because they want to know as well what's he actually like, or what are they interested in, or what was that conversation that you had. So from that perspective, it was good, but I would say as somebody who isn't massively into the real techie side, I'm not a tech nerd. It wasn't for me as much as it would have been for some other, like some of Lawrence's crew loved it. They loved the pouring over the different tech and the different specs and all that stuff. For me, I'm more into the kind of competition of sim racing as opposed to the the kind of the hardware side of it, if you know what I mean.
I think you also make a very good point with regards to LAN events. You know that obviously
Mm,
when you and you, Jack, and Bryn were in Poland for the Digital Motorsports World Cup, which was a LAN event in terms of hosting, but everyone
mm,
was off-site, you know,
mm,
at home in their own respective bubbles. And we're seeing a lot of tournaments now. I mean, we've got ESL R1 coming up in a couple of weeks' time at DreamHack in Sweden, where it's warts and all, no one can hide. But are we going to see like when I still remember seeing when they went to Katowice in the arena there, and that was the first two rounds. They had all 48 drivers there. They had a big production value, and then they go to interview the drivers, and you just like go ask this question, and then all of a sudden you get a one-word answer, and it's like, "Ah, where are the stories? You know, where's the personality?" And like everyone,
mm,
and when I got to know a lot of the team, like say from Williams Esports, like say good old Dara McCormack, absolute wizard behind the wheel, and always
mm,
got time for him. I still remember when I first worked with Williams a long, long time ago, And Dara was one of the first people. And he said, "Oh, hi, Alex." And the icebreaker was how to pronounce his first name, because
Yeah,
people might say phonetically, "Oh, is it Darah?" No, it's not. It's Dai with an accent on it, Re. And then he
yeah,
told
father,
me,
yeah,
and that's the thing when it's like the spellings are completely different to the pronunciations with
mm,
like say Neve, another perfect example of an Irish first
yeah,
name. But I think, yeah, I completely understand, and I wholeheartedly agree that there should be more LAN events coming up. I mean, obviously, we're now through what happened in 2020, right the way through to mid 2022 with the pandemic. But I think, yeah, more LAN events. I mean, DreamHack is coming back with full force. Obviously, um, ESL, one of the biggest players in the market when it comes to esports in general, and we're not just talking racing, we're talking League of Legends, Counter Strike 2, so much going on. Um, but I think, uh, it's a case of the bubble hasn't burst yet for esports. I think. Would you agree on that, Kevin? Like the way that it's going?
I think people at the time during COVID overemphasized the growth that was going to happen with the pandemic. I do think that people thought, oh, this is it now. Like, especially for sim racing, I think people thought this is our big moment. Like, it's only uphill from here. And then you find that people actually do kind of tend to go back to their old habits. So, even our own team with Wildfire, it was like we were at one point, we had 4 or 5 cars into the Daytona 24 hours. Now we're struggling to enter one car with 4 drivers because people are just busy. They have life and things. I'm buying a house, and other guys have kids, and people have college, and like that's just the reality of it. So I think I think when it comes to LAN events, like to be fair with the Digital Motorsports World Cup, we did manage to get the Polish drivers on site. That was as much as we could do with the regulations that were there at the time. We couldn't fly in people from abroad. That was one of the reasons why we actually had a presenter change, because one of our presenters literally couldn't make it because of the COVID restrictions in their country. And I thought it wasn't going to happen at all. I mean, when it first was announced, I thought, right, well, Ireland was in very stringent lockdown, and there was no hope of us ever getting out of the country. I mean, I was delighted to get outside 5K, never mind getting on a flight to go across Europe. And I felt very privileged. So in that way, it was good that we did get to get some drivers on site and we did get to chat to them. But I think with the um I don't think the bubble has burst, but I certainly don't think the bubble was as great as people thought. One of the things you mentioned there, which I thought was kind of interesting, was kind of like you're saying having all the drivers on site and you try and interview them and the kind of one word answers. And it's a funny one because we always talk about media training as a negative thing, because people think that media training is the ability to deflect and or deflect the answers, right? But my feeling about media training is media training gives you the tools to express yourself without making an idiot of yourself. So you can be confident in saying what you want to say without saying it in a way that um, you know, throw somebody under the bus. And I think it would be great for some of these esports teams with the resources that they have to lean on a little bit. Because, like, you see the drivers, I mean, the drive to survive thing, like the example that's always used. But even in interviews, they're like drivers are relatively honest without giving too much away, but they always stay true to themselves and their own personalities, and they're not afraid to express their personalities. And that's something I think that we've seen more recently. I think like my era of watching Formula One, I remember best is kind of Murray Walker, ITV, kind of mid 2000s, and there was no personalities on the grid. You never heard about what the drivers were doing or what they were like or what their personalities were like, apart from Michael Schumacher, because he was the only one that was winning anything, and Eddie Jordan or Eddie Irvine, should I say, who was kind of notorious in Ireland for being a bit of a party boy and all that kind of stuff. But other than that, like we didn't really hear about the personalities. And I think again, esports, that's something that we miss a little bit, just because I think it's those guys, like they're trained to be drivers. They spend most of their time, let's be honest, by themselves, practicing in their either their bedrooms or wherever it is. So when you shove a camera in front of their face, I think people who do that tend to be naturally more introverted because they enjoy video games that are a little bit more, and I say video games as as an overall genre, but so it's very hard for them then to kind of naturally be very relaxed in front of camera. That's why people like watching streamers because they have that kind of personality about them. So for us, it's our job to try and bring them out of their shell. But I think there's also a certain amount of onus on the teams themselves to work with drivers and say, okay, well, look, there are going to be more LAN events. You are going to have the camera put in front of yourself a bit more. There's no problem with you being you. Just don't tell that joke you told on Discord the other day because that won't go down well. You know what I mean? Like it's about that balance between them being comfortable to express their personality without feeling like they'll say something wrong and it'll cause this big online drama. Because as we both know, the sim racing world loves nothing more than a bit of a thirst for some nonsense drama that really doesn't really affect anybody, but people love talking about it anyway, you know?
Yeah, that's very true. I mean, especially when we saw all the moves that were being made in the sim racing like driver market, like some
Mm.
big names moving on, like Door Esports having Moritz Lerner move to Mouse, and then we find that
Mm.
Max Benecke also joins him, having left Redline, and then you got the tallest sim racer in the world, Yuri Kasdorp, also moving to Mouse, along with I think it was Patrick Hoffman. So you saw all these moves. You then saw the likes of Blyer, Jesse Glatch moving to Williams, Dennis Scheninger moving from Unicorns of Love to Williams. I think it was as soon as everyone had started announcing where they were going, or the teams were doing it for them, it was like this complete whirlpool of madness where everyone couldn't believe what was going on. I mean, forget what the F1 driver market's normally at the point when silly season sort of comes around at about Spa-Francorchamps onwards.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think like you say, it's just like having those stories and having those drivers bring a little bit more of a sort of a personality. But as you say, I think as Shakespeare said it rightly, to thine own self be true. You know,
Yeah.
you want to sort of give it away, give some things away, but not give everything away. Like say strats and like the old 3000 IQ strats that we keep on hearing of on sim racing commentary these days. Um, but I've got some other questions because I mean that's been quite an nice in-depth chat that we've actually had. So I've actually gone away from my usual line of questioning, folks, because sometimes it doesn't always work. It doesn't always work depending on who I have on the show. But Kevin, obviously having been a broadcaster for sports and obviously doing the sim racing, has there been any commentators that you've always enjoyed listening to? I mean, I would take it Murray's one of them, but are there any others
Mm.
that, whether it be from motorsports or for sort of like sports broadcasting, such as football, rugby, are there any sort of commentators that really stand out to you?
Yeah, and from the motorsports side, I love Martin Haven. I know he's kind of controversial in some ways, but I love how irreverent he is. He just comes up with the heroin line with the halfway through Le Mans last year where somebody jumps in. It's no, not that. That kind of stuff. Like I find him very funny. I suppose he's a great example of somebody who's so knowledgeable about their sport that they don't feel like they have to be knowledgeable about it because they have so much knowledge that they're quite comfortable expressing it if and when required. So from that side, I think he's excellent. Actually, from the sim racing side, I love listening to Lewis McGlade. I think he's a great commentator, and I find him really insightful without being again overly kind of shoving it down your throat. So, because I think some guys they almost feel like they have to prove the knowledge that they have, when in actual fact, knowledge is an assist to what you're doing, not the reason why you're doing it. From other sports, I suppose it's a very good question. There's some broadcasters, I don't know necessarily about commentators, definitely commentators I don't like, in certain worlds of sport. Like, I mean, Motti would be a great example of somebody that I was a very controversial hot take, but I was never really that much of a fan of Motti. I know he's kind of this iconic character in British sport, but just the shouting, it just really like it's just a constant shouting, and there's a few others have taken that on. There's a guy who does a lot of stuff for commentaries in England, and he's an Irishman, Conor McNamara. He does a lot of rugby, has done a lot of sport, done Match of the Day in the past as well. So I'd listen a lot to him. And then I suppose another person who I think is really good on soccer would be Kieran Dyer. Sorry, not Kieran Dyer. Jermaine Genius. I always get those two mixed up for some reason because they both played in
Oh yeah,
Newcastle in the same time.
Jermaine is
Jermaine Genius.
he is a
Yeah.
character. I mean, especially when you see the chats between him, Gary Lineker, and Alan Shearer, like it's
Yeah.
just complete and utter farcical comedy. It's like they're the three Ronnies, let alone the two Ronnies. With Ronnie Baker and Ronnie Parker
I like
Michael.
Genius though. I really do like the fact that he can kind of do both. Like I suppose he's modern enough. He's a young guy. He kind of gets the young side of things, but then also he's very analytical. Does some really good analysis, and I know a lot of that is done by the actual match of the day team. But the way he delivers it is really. I really like him. I've seen him in a lot of other things. He comes across very well. But yeah, there's definitely some I just kind of grind, like I suppose and it's kind of hard because we have a lot of Irish examples that people might necessarily be familiar with, but our own national broadcaster has a big focus on Gaelic games in Ireland. So what you end up having is Gaelic games commentators commentating on soccer matches and then getting all the positions incorrect because they still think they're commentating on a Gaelic match. So it's like calling teams by the wrong names or not giving them the full names because they don't know because there's it's so those I have a lot of like pet peeves. So I think I always try and take those and kind of think to myself, I suppose I would always my dad is very passionate about his sport and about commentators. So sometimes when I commentate, the first thing in my mind is like, would he be annoyed if I said that? Would he think that was a stupid thing to say? So before I open my mouth, sometimes that's kind of what I think of when I think of it. It's actually it's led me fairly well thus far, especially when it comes to soccer. Anyway, before I open my mouth and say something stupid, I always think, right, would he be calling me an idiot if I said that? Okay, better not say it.
Or words to that effect if it's talking
Yeah,
face to face. I mean, with any commentator or broadcaster, there's always sort of future goals that we as individuals like to sort of set ourselves. Have you got any sort of like future goals in what you want to achieve in the broadcasting space, so to speak, Kevin?
oh yeah, absolutely. Commentate at an Olympics. That's definitely a long-term goal. I suppose I was hoping for Paris because I speak French, but unfortunately, it looks like I'm running out of time rather rapidly for that. So I'll have to go probably as a spectator instead. I think one of the things I wanted to do is I always wanted to work at like an All Ireland final. I did that. Got to work at an FAI Cup final. Some of the bigger events, Ireland international matches. I'd love to commentate at a World Cup finals. I would love to. And again, like when it comes to the sim racing side of things, another digital motorsports World Cup or something to that liking. I mean, I had obviously come from the radio world, and this is where Bryn was amazing. Bryn is such a pro with TV. I mean, he obviously gets it so well. He's done so much. I've done pieces to camera and I've done video stuff, but not to the full production TV studio that the World Cup was. And I remember kind of flying over there being like super nervous, being like, oh God, like, you're not the greatest looking chap. You have a bit of a lisp. Like, will people start judging you on TV and how will it all go? You know yourself. I mean, everybody has those, if you put a camera in front of anybody, nobody's going to look at themselves and be like, I look amazing. I am class. Like everyone's going to have those things in their mind. They're going to kind of be going, what's going on? But the minute I got there and I got to the TV gantry, I just felt so like, I felt very comfortable. I mean, I don't wanna say I felt at home, but, like, I felt very comfortable. I kinda thought to myself, "Yeah, this is kind of what I'd really like to do." So, definitely, I'd love to be working full time as a commentator in the TV sphere or as some sort of reporter in sport. My career is taking a very different path at the moment, but hopefully in years to come, I'll be back working on sport in front of the camera or in some capacity broadcasting, because the kick, yourself, like the buzz you get from it. If you could box it up and sell it, you'd make millions. So, it's brilliant.
And I've got one final question before we wrap things up. It's been a real pleasure having you on the show, Kevin, and thanks for taking the time out of your schedule to join me. Um, Now, we're going to go back to motors. We're going back to cars and we're going to racetracks. So, Kevin Galvin, in your own time, if you had no budget, no glass ceiling, and you could pick either a choice of road car or race car, what ones would you have? You can have more than one because there is no budget involved. And what circuit would you drive around? Now, there is a little bit of a flip side on this because Kevin will give his response and then I will retort looking at the same era and the same track, possibly, as my answer to the question. So, Kevin, take it away.
I like that. It just, I mean, off the top of my head, it has to be the E30 Evo I mean, I love that car. It just so happens that it was at SimRacing Expo. That is probably my favorite race car of all time. And yeah, it just has to be NURBS, doesn't it? Like you can't take an M3 E30 to Catalonia. Like it has to be driven somewhere proper. So yeah, I think the Evo M3 Evo around NURBS with full sequential. Yeah, definitely. That'll be my answer.
Okay, so we're talking early 1990s DTM style here, folks.
hmm
So
hmm
I'm going to look at one of their competitors, and it was the big one that was alongside him, the three-pointed star, the Mercedes 190 Evo 2.316 Cosworth. And it's not the Hockenheim we know now. It's the Hockenheim that went through the forests, and it was over
Oh, the old
6.6
one.
kilometers long. So, Kevin, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. Folks, if you do want to give Kevin a follow, links are in the description for socials. Kevin, thank you so much for joining me for episode 31. It's been a real pleasure.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on, Alex. And again, it was so nice to meet all of you at the SimRacing Expo, and really hope that more LAN events will see each other shortly, and we'll be able to catch up over a few beers.
Definitely. That looks to be the case, hopefully, for 2024. Because, of course, for those wondering, the dates for the ADAC SimRacing Expo in Dortmund for 2024 are the 18th to the 20th. Tickets will be opening, I think, not too far away from now. But don't forget, if you haven't already liked, shared, or subscribed on the YouTube channel, please feel free to do so. If you have been listening on either one of the following audio spaces: Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or on Downforce Radio, the nation's motorsport station. Thank you so much for listening and for watching. And I'll see you again soon for episode 32. If in doubt, flat out, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye.